Thank you for joining us for another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement. I'm here at the News Forum where all voices matter. With the proposed disciplining of Jordan Peterson by the College of Psychologists of Ontario, the issue of free speech and political discrimination in the workplace is in full view. What can and cannot be protected is a new layer of debate in these cancel culture times. I'm pleased to have join us Kathryn Marshall. She is a lawyer at Levitt Sheikh Law Firm in Toronto, and she will discuss this issue. Welcome to Boom and Bust.
Thanks for having me on.
I guess the first thing is, could you describe the issues between Jordan Peterson and the College of Psychologists?
Well, essentially, in that case, what's going on is that the college received complaints by people who were not Dr. Peterson's patients and had taken issue with things he posted on Twitter. And they are requiring him to undertake social media training. And I mean, when you look at the actual complaint itself, and Dr. Peterson's posted part of it online, it's a lot of people who, they take an issue with his commentary, his opinions, and specifically tweets that he posted about Trudeau and what most people would probably call conservative, small c conservative leaning opinions.
Where does it stand right now?
Well, right now, my understanding, and I'm not counsel
Right.
on that particular case, but just what I know from reading about it in the news and Jordan Peterson's tweets is he's not surprisingly refusing to give in to this outrageous persecution by the college, and he has launched a challenge in court, essentially challenging the bylaws and the provisions of the College of Psychologists' internal legislation that, or not legislation, but policies that
Right.
are enabling them to basically go after Dr. Peterson for having opinions that people don't like.
Right. Okay, so let's pivot from that sort of discussion, which I guess is kind of well known in any event, and talk about something that you've been concerned about and you've written about, co-written with your law partner, Michael Levitt, who's also been on the program a few times. So how does this kind of debate or this case even impact on workplace employee relationships and dynamics?
Well, something that I've observed over the years acting for employees and their different employment issues is that there seems to be a growing trend of employers going after their employees for things that they are saying or doing that just don't conform to whatever political ideology the company might have. And this is definitely a problem because, of course, employment is very important. People rely on their jobs to put food on the table. And when you have situations where companies are really reaching beyond the perimeters of what is their responsibility and hauling people into meetings with HR because they posted something on Twitter or they donated to a certain cause that they don't, as a company, support or identify with, that becomes a really big problem, and I think a violation of people's human rights.
And again, I'm not looking for statistics, but anecdotally, at least, that this is becoming a more of an issue then, would you say, in our society?
Absolutely, because what's really happening is a lot of companies are participating in what people would call stakeholder activism. So you have companies that are just hopping on bandwagons of different causes, different issues, in hopes that it'll, make them more appealing to consumers, or maybe they're being subjected to pressure by consumers. You've got companies that maybe they're selling a soft drink, but they're also out there promoting a certain cause that has nothing to do with the product they're giving. And what they seem to be expecting employees to do in a lot of cases is conform to whatever the ideology or mission of that company is. And I mean, where I see a lot of cases is are people who are disciplined for
Right.
having, small c conservative views.
We're going to hold that thought because we do have to take a little bit of a break here, but we'll be back with our guest shortly. Kathryn, maybe just give our audience a little bit of a sense of how political speech and political activity is protected right now, or indeed is not protected. Can an employer fire an employee for political speech right now?
Well, this is the big problem. Political speech is not something that's protected by the Human Rights Act of Canada, which any federally regulated company or employer would be required to comply with. And it's not protected by the Ontario Human Rights Code. And I think most, I looked at this recently, but most provincial human rights codes don't protect political expression. What that means is that someone could be fired for espousing views that are politically unattractive to their employer, and they don't really have protection. They essentially, because you have this vacuum in the law, it allows employers to discriminate against people who they employ over political expression, and there is a big problem with that because we're seeing it happen a lot. I mean, we all remember like during the convoy protests, and I'm not providing an opinion as to whether those protests were good or bad, but what we saw a lot of was people being fired or disciplined because their names had appeared on a donation list that was
Right.
legally leaked by the media, and that's a big problem.
So I'll put it this way, a little bit of devil's advocate here, but I guess I'm wondering what your sense is of whether there is a balance or whether there's an absolute right in this case. But accountability to as a corporate leader to your stakeholders versus an individual's political rights. Is there a balance there, or are those political rights absolute rights?
What I tell employees who come to consult with me or employers who I'm working with is that, if they have an employee who has a Twitter account or a public facing social media account, and they actually, identify in their social media as being, vice president of X corporation, and then they're out there like, tweeting away all kinds of things. The employer does have a right to, monitor their social media and have policies in place that require that individual not say or do things that would cause the company to be embarrassed, and that's fair. That's something that's public, and the employees making a decision to like have their the company brand out there front and center. Where there is a big problem is when employees are attacked or disciplined for things that they, for expressing a political belief, whether it's through like volunteering, donating, participating in a meeting that has nothing to do with their job and no way identifies with their job. They're doing it solely as a private citizen, as is their right, and they get disciplined for that. And I'm not talking about someone going to a really offensive rally, someone there's a line, obviously, someone who's participating in, a hateful movement. We all kind of know where that line is. I'm talking about like, someone being disciplined for going to a Conservative Party of Canada fundraiser, because I've seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
It's the problem.
Yeah, and good point that it's what we don't know where if there is a line, we don't know when it is applied and when it isn't applied, and one person's perfectly legitimate participation in the political destiny of this nation could be offensive to someone and grounds for discipline. That's basically what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. You see a lot of these days, like companies and professional regulators who are trying to express like an ideology, which is a new thing. Like we didn't really see this in the 80s or the 90s or the early 2000s. One of the items that I covered in my article was, of course, the Law Society of Ontario has their different, their statement of principles, which ended up being quite controversial. And so you're seeing these organizations that regulate professionals and companies just coming out with like mission statements that don't really have anything to do with the work they're doing or the product they're selling or the service they're providing. And they don't explicitly tell,
Right.
employees like, oh, you have to sign on, but like you kind of do.
Yeah. We're speaking of product selling. We're going to take a brief commercial break with our guests, but we'll be back. And we're back here at Boom and Bust with Kathryn Marshall. She's a lawyer at Levitt Sheikh Law Firm. Kathryn, I guess one of the things you've written about is that there are now moves to protect political speech and activity in human rights codes. Can you elaborate on what's going on there?
Yeah, so there's a member of parliament from Alberta. His name is Garnett Genuis, and he has launched a private member's bill to add protection of political expression in the federal human rights code. And you know, it's very strange that it's actually not already in there. Like when you look at the enumerated grounds that are in the code, it protects pretty much everything except political expression. So it's a long time coming, but right now the bill is in Senate. It's slowly making its way through the system, and I think cases like Dr. Peterson's and Jamil Jabani, who's actually one
Right.
of my clients, he has an action against Bell. Those are the kinds of cases that are highlighting the need for this kind of protection. Of course, not everyone has a public profile where they can, or the stamina in them to launch like a huge, case to advocate for themselves. Most cases of political discrimination in the employment context you'll never hear about, but it has a trickle effect.
Right, right. And obviously, it also builds up precedent one way or the other.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I have clients who come into my office and they're at a loss. They're like, I don't know. They say to me, Kathryn, I don't know what is a politically correct thing to say anymore. I'm getting hauled into these HR meetings. I'm getting criticized because I liked a certain MP's tweet, and I don't know what the rules are
Right.
anymore. And I feel like I can't be myself.
So I'm going to ask you to put on your political hat just for a second. So, what should we expect from our political leaders in this societal debate, do you think?
Well, if I were a political leader, if I were a member of parliament, I would be championing this bill. I would absolutely be ensuring that employees have those protections because, of course, um, political leaders need to ensure that we have a country where people are free to engage in political activity and free to practice political expression. That's a foundational right. It's in our charter. And it's a big problem where people are being silenced through their jobs because, of course, there's nothing like getting in the way of someone's bread and butter, right? Like
Right.
we often see, a way of coercively controlling people is through their means of money. And I'm disappointed that more political leaders and politicians haven't stood up and supported this bill. I think it's really critically important and needed.
I'm going to turn it over to the individual cases again. And again, I know you're not proffering legal advice, but just generally speaking, let's put it that way. What should individual employees do to protect their rights in these situations?
My advice would be, definitely be very cautious about putting your employer's name on your social media. Like if you have a Twitter account, if you have a Substack or, Instagram or whatever you like to use, if you put your employer's name on there, you are giving your employer a license to control some of the things that you say. So my general rule of thumb is like, don't do that. Just have it be totally private, totally separate from your work.
Right.
Make sure that you're reviewing your company's social media policy. A lot of companies have those policies and they don't actually show them to the employees until you're hauled into a disciplinary meeting. Make sure you're aware of it. And if you have questions because it's vague, make sure you ask those questions. And if you are hauled into a meeting or you're questioned about something, make sure that you take very good notes, and that you follow up, get some legal advice. Don't just let yourself be silenced because someone in the executive of your company didn't like something that you did or said. um, we have to all fight back against this,
Right.
because trickle down is really, we're going to have a society where people are afraid to engage and afraid to say what they think.
We've got about 30 seconds before this segment is over, but generally, employers do have social media policies now?
Pretty much every employer does. And it's mostly just to cover themselves, right? So if they want to fire someone because they did something on social media, they can point to the policy. But it's really common to have. And but what I do find is a lot of employers don't actually share it with people. Like, it's just sort
Right.
of hidden away and then used strategically.
Exactly. We're going to continue our discussion. We've got one more segment to go. Very interesting discussion with Kathryn Marshall. She is a lawyer at Levitt Sheikh Law Firm in Toronto. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. And welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Kathryn Marshall. She is a lawyer at Levitt Sheikh Law Firm. Kathryn, we've talked a lot about employers, employees. Of course, the medium by which a lot of this discussion is taking place are social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. Just give me a sense of how you see social media's role and responsibility in this debate.
That's actually a really good question. I think it's generally something that social media companies have tried to distance themselves from. What I mean by that is, everyone's aware that people get canceled all the time for things they said on social media. Everyone's aware that people have lost their jobs, their lives, everything over, like, something they said on Twitter that went viral. And they look away. And I think social media companies need to do a better job of protecting people from, like, the mob harassment. They've got to actually enforce, like, either anti harassment policies, and create kind of like a less of a chilling effect platform, and organization.
Right, right. I mean, in a sense, despite this being just an area where we are getting this new type of political discrimination, let's call it that. At the same time, it has really broadened the debate on the role and responsibility of social media in all of this as well, hasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't think there's a lot that social media companies can do to protect, like, people in the workplace from being discriminated against, but they can certainly do a lot to actually clean up their own platforms and prevent, like, doxing and the mob harassment. I've had clients over the years who've been at the bottom of the mob pile, and it sucks to have someone whose whole life and their career has been ruined because they said something on Twitter that maybe wasn't the smartest thing they could have said, but it was not, like, horrible, but they ended up being, just shamed and targeted. And the mob then contacts their employer, and it's just this terrible domino effect. And then the mob moves on, and I launched legal actions about these mob style terminations, where my position is, employers shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be giving into people and organizations who target their employment to silence them.
Hmm.
It happens all the time.
Yeah, and obviously it has, and it seems that uh, really what you're expressing, and your position as a lawyer, and then Garnet Genuis, the member of Parliament who's got this new bill, seems to be that there's a little bit of a reaction finally against that, and maybe Jordan Peterson is the perfect case because here's a fellow who does have millions upon millions of followers and adherents. It's kind of like a Joe Rogan case in that sense when they tried to cancel Joe Rogan off the Spotify platform for some of his interviews. These are people who
Yeah.
who can command millions of adherents. So it's more of a fair fight, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And I think Dr. Pearson's bringing a lot of exposure to the issue. I know a lot of professionals, especially doctors, like medical doctors, who have told me, Catherine, I deleted my Twitter account. I'm so concerned about the College of Physicians coming after me if I express any skepticism about anything the government's doing. I am scared, and that's a big problem. We
Mm,
want professionals, we want everyone to feel like they can participate in our, like, thought culture, and they can be thought leaders, and they can go out there and express, their opinions. And that's, you know that's how it should be. But because you have these professional regulators and companies that are really just giving in so easily to the mob, it creates a really big chilling effect. I've talked to so many professionals who've just taken themselves completely out of um, you know, the public debate on issues.
right. Well, I think this is an evolving area of the law, and I'm glad that we've got your expertise on the program. Thanks for being on the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Many thanks to Kathryn Marshall again, a lawyer at Levitt Sheikh Law Firm. A very interesting discussion about political discrimination. The Jordan Peterson case obviously is the one that everybody knows, but there's many other people affected. I hope you enjoyed the program as well.